Welcome to the Analytics Engineering Podcast, featuring conversations with practitioners inventing the future of analytics engineering.
On this episode, we're going to be hearing from longtime DBT community member David Jayatillake. David is a senior data director at Lyst, which is a UK fashion site. We wanted to speak with David about many of the common decisions data teams have to make. We talked about how he migrated his team's data warehouse and how he thinks about bringing new technologies into his company. We then spent the remainder of the episode talking about data careers and how to distinguish yourself as an analyst. This is a great conversation to listen to, especially if you're a practitioner. Tristan, I so enjoyed having a community member as a guest. What did you think?
Yeah, we've gotten some shade recently, or I have on Twitter, about how it's mostly been founders and Stanford grads on the show. And so it was super exciting for me to have somebody on who has been deep in the trenches and doing like really fantastic work. One of the most interesting things from this episode for me was, I don't know that David specifically said it in this way, but it reminded me of the saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. He talked extensively about how when coming into the business, there was this moment where it's like there's real pain. And he used that opportunity to do major forward progress on the stack and the capabilities of the organization. And so what I think one of the hardest things as a practitioner is you have these moments of kind of like stasis where the business is roughly happy with the capabilities of the data team. And then you get increasingly frustrated because you want to like make these new forward steps. So like, how do you identify when those moments are where you can like really push the boundaries of like what your team is capable of?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary of the episode. We hear a lot about kind of the day-to-day business as normal, and then how do you take those moments where you have crisis or opportunity really to do something different. So this was a fun episode, and without further ado, let's get into it.
David, welcome to the episode. Thanks for joining us.
Very glad to be here.
Julia has a million questions that I'm excited to get to, but I want to take a second to dive into your journey to data. And I say that because when I do my typical LinkedIn background research, I identify a lot with your background. Business major in a couple of different ways, and then a couple of different jobs that felt like they were like slowly making their way towards more quantitative areas. And then it seems like you kind of took a big jump at some point in time. I'm curious to have you tell the story of how you ended up leading data teams, because my guess is that a bunch of listeners are going to find that it describes their path as well.
I hope so. So if I start high school, I was doing maths and STEM subjects. And from there, I went to university where I also studied maths with management. And from there, I wasn't really sure what to do. So I got an internship at a Big Four accounting firm called E&Y now. They're called Ernst & Young at the time. And I really didn't enjoy it. I really didn't enjoy audit. The part I enjoyed was the modeling and analysis part of trying to help companies be more efficient. And so I decided to move on to become an analyst. And so I got my first analyst job at a company called Ocado, who are pretty famous in the UK and are probably becoming more famous in the US due to their white labeling of their grocery robotics behind big supermarkets like Kroger in the US.
I didn't realize that. That's cool. I've talked to some folks on their data team, but that's I didn't know about the robotics part.
Yeah. So that's what they're most famous for, is their robotic warehouses for supermarket fulfillment. So that was like actually one of the very best data places I've worked at, and it was a long time ago. So they were very advanced for their time. So that's where I learned my SQL and Excel, because at the time there wasn't really BI tools to speak of. They were one of the first companies I'd heard of that played around with Tableau. So I remember playing around with a very early version of Tableau while I was there. And so from there, I moved to WorldPay, which is where I've spent still probably over half of my career. And I did a number of different roles there. So my first role there was as a business analyst. But really, what I was doing was building data models in SQL Server and running stored procedures to fulfill, different end users' needs. So from finance to sales to marketing to product, to help them understand what they needed to through data. So it's really funny when I think back to reading Claire Curl's article about I'm a data something. I'm thinking, yeah, that was me, and now in hindsight, that's kind of like why I identify as an analytics engineer, because that's what I've spent a lot of my career doing, is building data models to enable others. I very rarely, I wasn't the kind to enjoy doing a piece of analysis repeatedly. I'd like to do it once, and then if it got asked of me again, I'd automate it or hand it over to someone else. And so at WorldPay, I had a number of other analytics roles. So I built some really complex cost models, because payment processing has some really complex costs. Again, all like SQL data models. And from there, I moved into pricing. That's kind of where I wanted to have a bigger commercial impact in the business I worked at. So pricing was great at WorldPay because you'd build things like regression curves and decide pricing policy and repricing campaigns to improve your profitability. So I did that for a number of years. Pricing is quite niche, though. Not very many organizations have dedicated pricing functions. And someone like myself, who's quite happy to be a data generalist, I was really happy to go back to a more mainstream data role. So that's when I moved to a fintech called Elevate, and I headed up their BI and analytics team there, which is like a mixed analytics and data science team. And after a relatively short time there, I ended up at Lyst, where I am now. I started off with a very small team of 2. We just were analysts. We just did everything, analytics engineering and analytics. And it's kind of gradually progressed, from week 2 of me being there and deciding to rip out Redshift, stick in Snowflake and DBT and do it 8 weeks before Black Friday.
Decided to up the level of complexity.
Yeah. Redshift was falling over and everyone was complaining that they were worried they couldn't do what they needed to for Black Friday. So, if it's broken, you can have a chance to fix it with high risk, which is one of the cool things about working here, actually. So,
thanks for going through that story. I wonder how much of that felt like uncertain and a little bit lost in the jungle. So when I think about my own career, which, I did the Big Four accounting for, I was on the consulting side, and then did my MBA and bounced around in a bunch of different functions inside of a business. But the quantitative part was always the through line for everything. But I don't think I could have told you that I would end up, quote unquote, in data. And a lot of that felt very stressful to figure out where to take my career that felt good, that felt to be a natural fit.
Sure. Yeah.
You certainly didn't, while math and accounting and business are relevant to analytics, it's not like if you major in those things, they coach you on how to build a career in analytics. So how much of this did you intentionally seek out versus how much of it was kind of emergent, and how did you kind of find your way here?
I knew from the outset that I was a very quantitative person and I wanted to do something in that realm. And now that's big. So I think that's why naturally I moved towards accounting, and having giant internships at every major university helped with that. And then the exposure there to the different types of work you could do. So some quite routine and rote, and some analytical and more creative. That was the piece that attracted me, was trying to explain things, trying to model, trying to optimize using data and maths. That was the part that attracted me. So then I just thought, well, let's be an analyst. And I wasn't even sure what that meant at that point, having never touched the database or anything like that. And then I happened to see that role at Ocado and apply.
I'm curious. You talk a lot about the STEM background in maths. We've had this conversation a bunch on the episode, on past episodes, what makes for a great analyst. And it's interesting, Brittany Bennett talked a lot about mission-driven alignment, and Ben, who we just had on, talked about curiosity and being willing to just dig. Do you think you need the math STEM background as a prerequisite to being a great data analyst, or is it something else in your mind?
I think it definitely helps because it's the way you see the world, is in a quantitative lens. So that's why I think you find a lot of people attracted to analytics from those backgrounds, because it's natural to them to think that way. But I don't think it's essential. So I've worked with some great analysts who've done English literature degrees or something completely different. But because they have that curiosity to dig and understand something, that helps. So that you can kind of approach it from that angle too. And then because you want to understand something, then you'll learn the tech skills to help you get there.
This is like something I end up talking to people about frequently. It's like, how do you construct a career that gets you to a rewarding data profession? And it can be very challenging. I think, this has been written about a bunch recently. You can't truly practice being an analyst until you have a data set to work with. So you found your way in, and it sounds like that had a lot to do with an internship that was at least partially facilitated by a university. Is there standard advice that you get for helping people take that like initial jump in their journeys?
I think it's so much easier now than when I started out. There's so many options. There's so many courses, and Udemy, Coursera, DataCamp. There's all these places offering ways to interactively learn with provided data sets. In the data science space, there's things like Kaggle and things where you can try your hand with real data. I think there's also, and one of the things I've done in my spare time is there is a lack of people out there who actually know how to deal with data. If you go into the like smaller worlds of like your local areas and things that they need. So like in the village I live in, they have to do surveys to understand how people feel about development. And so one of the things I did is like when I moved to that village, is I volunteered to do their analysis for them. Now it's a small data set, but it's an interesting data set. And actually that could be a way in for someone who's starting out is to go and help with some kind of community project.
That's so cool. Yeah, I could not agree more. Like, find ways to get your hands dirty with real things. Okay, last thing for you before I turn you over to Julia. You've used the word village. You've used maths, plural. If listeners are not aware by this point, you hail from the UK. I have actually, and it makes me very sad, I have not made it over to London for a DBT meetup before. And I need to, and I hope that 2022 will see that happen. But how do you feel about the community over there? I think it's growing and vibrant and friendly and awesome. It's been a while since all of us have been able to go to in-person meetups, but yeah, maybe compare and contrast. What do you think is special about the London community?
No, I think the London community is great. I remember hearing about DBT in a job interview because Dylan Baker was interviewing me. And so Dylan asked me, have you heard of these things? And he started off with Snowflake, Looker, and DBT. And of course, I knew about Snowflake and Looker. I was like, what's DBT? And that's how I ended up looking into it. So the first meetup I went to was hosted by Dylan, and I think it was at Simply Business, which is in the heart of the city of London. And it was already feeling really good. Like there was probably well over 100 people there. And then since Dylan's moved back to Canada, there's been Alan from Tails.com who's taken over, and he's kept the spirit alive for sure. And I think it'd be great to go back to an in-person DBT meetup sometime soon. I think that it felt like the London DBT community sprung up very, very quickly, probably thanks to Dylan heavily pushing it forward, in conjunction with it growing in the US. Probably, I wouldn't be surprised if it grew a bit faster than the US community for a while.
Alan, thanks for everything you do there.
I just found it so interesting how there are these like famous names in the DBT community. You say Dylan Baker, and it's like everyone knows, just like, and for me too, like before even joining DBT, one of the other PMs, Jericho, he was famous Jeremy Cohen. So I like that about the DBT community. You get to actually understand and meet the humans that contribute to making both the product and community better. But anyway, so I wanted to get into the episode. I'd love to take it in a couple places. First, talk a bit about some of the tech investments that you've made either at Lyst or some of the other companies you've worked at. And then we'll spend a big chunk of it going a bit deeper into the people behind the work and actually talk more about data professionals' careers and some of the more human aspects to the data work. You casually dropped at the intro of this episode that you went through a warehouse migration weeks before Black Friday.
Yeah.
Probably wasn't so casual.
No.
Tell us what that was like.
So I remember coming into Lyst and we had Redshift with some custom Python scripts doing some of our heavier transformations. And trying to use Redshift was so painful because sometimes it just your query wouldn't run. And, we were also trying to do a fundraise at the time. So we were trying to get data to finance for investors. And it was just painful. I remember staying up till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And the only reason was because that was the time in which I could actually get Redshift to output something. And so that I came in having wanted to bring in Snowflake and DBT because in the interview they mentioned these problems that they had. It wasn't a surprise. And my solution was for their concurrency at least, was Snowflake. So 2 weeks in, having encountered these problems and got my hands very dirty very quickly, I proposed a new stack of keeping Looker but shifting to Snowflake and DBT for orchestration of those transformations. I guess like one of the scary things about it is that I'd never used DBT before that point, but I'd read a lot of documentation. I'd had people I knew use it. I'd never used Git before. I'd never come across a container.
You're a very courageous human.
Yeah, so I was told when I joined Lyst that we were happy to fail fast, and and it's a safe failure place. So I took them at their word and went for it. I was very fortunate to have a principal engineer helping me with so it's the two of us and one analyst working very tightly on this migration. And he introduced me to Git to a point where I could work with it with DBT. He set up our DBT repo and made sure all the APIs integrated properly. That part of it, which could have taken me a very long time, was suddenly done in a couple of days. And that was partly why I could then start just looking at what was in LookML, looking at what was in the custom Python scripts and start migrating them to DBT. Actually, for me, picking up writing DBT models was very easy. As soon as I'd written one or two, it just started flowing very naturally. I think for someone who knows SQL and Python, it's a very easy thing to pick up. It's actually more the infrastructure part that was more difficult.
Say more about the infrastructure part. What was like the hardest part in that migration?
Yeah, I think it's just a lack of knowledge. I mean, for someone who's just been a pure analyst for many years and been provided with a data warehouse to use and then BI tools on top, you never had to worry about getting these things working or integrated. I've never had to use Git before. So there's a lot of new stuff that is commonplace for a software engineer, but actually for analysts before DBT, you probably would never have touched.
Yeah, there's probably like a small victory when you were able to get the modeling piece done, but then you have to figure out how to deploy it. And that's a whole nother kind of beast in its own right.
Yeah.
If there was like one, maybe more on the warehouse side, like just moving data is still very hard, right? It has a lot of gravity. Is there any advice you would give to someone trying to make that switch of moving data warehouses? Definitely do not do this, which I did, or definitely do this.
One thing, and at the time, this wasn't the case. Like we had the rudiments of a data lake and really a data mesh because Lyst has the Spotify model of organization. That only had a very small amount of history because of how new it was. So in order for our new data warehouse to have the same level of history, we had to just output a lot of data from the old one. And that was really painful, actually, given that it wasn't performant. Getting that data out was very difficult. And then even now, I guess we still have a bit more history from doing that migration from data warehouse to data warehouse than what's in our data mesh. And if possible, I would advise having a complete data lake with enough history to feed your new data warehouse. That I would definitely recommend.
And what do you use for your data lake? I think there's constant conversations about competing forces of whether everything should be in your data warehouse or in data lake, and they're looking more and more similar. Curious what your setup is.
Yeah, so we have AWS S3 buckets, and we have some of those buckets are considered the data lake and some are not. So if you think about where our data warehouse, Snowflake fits in. I think really parts of it are considered the data lake as well, because they are just a copy of what's in S3 to be able to be used in DBT models. And so the line between the data lake being in S3 and being in Snowflake is quite blurred. And if you ask one engineer at Lyst versus another how they feel about it, you'll probably get a different answer as to whether they think that is part of the data lake or not.
You've said a couple of times now, partnership with the engineering team. Are these humans who have quote unquote data engineer titles, or are these like full stack software engineers that like in their day jobs, they're like building your product?
They're usually either full stack or front end or back end specialist engineers. Very few of them are data engineers. I think we only have one or two true data engineers at Lyst.
I love this, but it's a little bit unusual because I think that it's often very challenging. Many software engineers don't actually know how to traverse this world, the world of the modern data stack. They just don't have to do a lot of that. And also it can be very hard to pull folks who could be building product features into the world of like internal analytics and BI. It sounds like you've built a really fantastic partnership with that team though. One, is that true? And two, how have you done that?
Yeah, so we definitely have built quite strong partnerships with them. I guess one of the good things about the way we've done it is those teams own their domains of data. So the data that's in S3, in the S3 part of the data lake for their domain, is theirs to own, and it's not ours, it's theirs. And so what happens is occasionally some of those teams, typically the marketing teams with engineers, will also want that data to be in Snowflake. So then we've built infrastructure in the terms of Terraform modules, which automatically pipeline that data from S3 into Snowflake, and then they can go and build DBT models on top of it themselves, or they can ask for help. And actually what we found, especially now from having started with just maybe 3 of us in the company knowing anything about DBT, we've got probably 50, 60 people using it. And then most of them are software engineers. They're not analytics engineers or analysts or data scientists.
They're committing DBT code.
Yes, all the time.
Cool.
That's super interesting. So you made a couple investments then in multiple open source companies or projects. DBT, you mentioned Terraform. And one of the benefits of both is gives you portability, right? If your DBT open source is an open source project, you can model all your business logic in it. Same thing with Terraform. It's open source infrastructure as code. It gives you ability to change clouds, for instance, if you wanted to. Was that at all a part of your decision making, or what are some of the benefits that you've got from making these investments in open source technologies within your data stack?
Certainly with DBT, given we used it for migration from one data warehouse to another, it's obviously in our minds that it would be very straightforward to then migrate all our logic again to another data warehouse if we wanted to. And you can see some burning competitors to Snowflake on the horizon who we could consider. But
fiery competitors.
Yeah. But and so with Terraform, I guess there an elements of that is about portability, although I would imagine if we were to move to another data warehouse, I think the Terraform work would probably be more onerous than the DBT work to move. But with Terraform, what really the draw of it was actually to automate how resources are created. So squads, roles, grants, schemas, like we have 2 or 3 key modules in Terraform which either build data pipelines into Snowflake or actually build teams. So we'll provide a module, email addresses and names of team members and what team they're in and what kind of warehouses they need. And it will just create all of those things, ensure they have access and all at once. So it just makes it easy for us to onboard. It makes it easy for us to pipeline. That's the real draw of Terraform. Actually, I hadn't thought about it as a draw for migration.
Yeah, it gives you this like independence from any particular cloud or any warehouse vendor itself. It does give you some freedom.
Yeah.
Is that owned by the data team or is that owned by your software team? Because I think traditionally Terraform is more viewed as software developer land. And I'm so curious as these worlds blend, Is your data team learning how to set up Terraform modules and set up all these roles within Terraform? And maybe if so, like how did people learn this new skill?
A software engineer originally set it up, our Terraform. So we have two Terraform repos at Lyst. Like one is just for all of our AWS resources, and one is purely for Snowflake. And so an engineer set up the one for Snowflake for us, but we look after it. And so the analytics engineers in particular are the experts in how to change modules, deal with any Terraform problems.
I'm very jealous. I think that the Terraform and Snowflake integration has gotten significantly better recently, right?
Yeah.
I have not had the opportunity to play around with it. Are you using the Chen Zuckerberg provider?
Yeah, that's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think some of our engineers have actually committed to that to that provider before. So yeah, so we use that. And I think, a data team can look after a Terraform repository where it's very focused on their resources. I think it would be very difficult for them to look after a wider Terraform repository, which was related to all of platform's resources.
Hey everyone, just dropping in to let you know that the annual Analytics Engineering Conference, Coalesce, is back. We had the first Coalesce last year in December, and it was fantastic. We had 3,000 registrants, tons of presentations, and this year is going to be even bigger. Register for free at coalesce.getdbt.com.
We talked a lot about some of the big tech investments that you've made. Seems like you're starting to build data as products, which we've talked about before. It's like, how do you build a platform within your organization so that there's a lot of investment from the data team, and then hopefully your business users or the other consumers of the data can get what they need? What have you done maybe on the people side or culturally, organizationally, to make sure that your data team is thinking about how do we create value or create a data product versus constantly being the recipient of questions or more of a services team of, I need this data, shoulder tap the data team?
There is still a fair bit of reactive. Like, I think the most reactive we have, like, channel we have is probably our BI Slack channel, where people ask questions. Now, we have to be quite quite strict about, this is for letting us know you think something is broken, or where is this thing in Looker. It's not for some deeper question, which should really be a Jira ticket or something like that. But even then, I still think, even with the Jira Kanban workflow we have for our tickets, I still feel that's reactive. Like you said, it's still like being tapped on the shoulder for something. It's just in a better and more well-structured way where you can prioritize it. What I want and what our team has become more focused on is where we have analytics engineers looking at those tickets, and when they build the data models, building them in a generic way to solve many tickets and many foreseen tickets at once. And then you have analysts, most likely I want them to become much more proactive about writing maybe pieces of research for the business about more complex topics and sharing them almost like in a blog style on Confluence or wherever else, so that the business can react to those recommendations and those insights and actually change. So that, I think that's where, that's a real product in my mind. It's like a consulting product that internal analytics team can do for you. And then if you think about the analytics engineers are building, it's the data model that enables both that product, but also self-service analytics from everyone else in the business.
Got it.
And also, increasingly, you see things like Snowflake Marketplace and the rise of data products, reverse ETL, these themes of how people are monetizing their data. We want to move towards that too. We're trying to build towards a data product, at least for our partners and possibly other third parties as well.
When you're younger in your career, it's often like a tangible skill set that you need to acquire to be good at your job, like, SQL, DBT, maybe there's some other skills that help you. As people progress in data careers, is it more technical skills that start differentiating them, or is it softer skills, people management, storytelling, ability to change organizational patterns? How does that evolve as you grow into progressive levels of your career in data?
I think that's a really interesting, that's quite a deep question, because for me, it depends on your choice. And at Lyst, and I think, and this is true of big tech companies and other tech companies in the US, you don't have to go into management to progress in your career. You can be an individual contributor at quite a high level, almost up to CXO level. And as an analyst, I think progressing in that individual contributor way, sure, there's a point at which your technical skills are good enough to do any role above that. And actually then it's much more about storytelling, influence, and it's almost like being who your business needs you to be at that point in time, looking in the right places, helping them understand their problems, making the recommendations to the right teams. That's, I think, the higher levels of being an analyst as an individual contributor. Whereas I think that when you're on the management side of that progression, I think the difference between, as for being an analyst, is you're trying to be much more generic about understanding what are the wider needs, what does everyone need to know, and trying to translate those requirements into either something you're going to engineer yourself or ask analytics engineering and data engineering to provide for you, to enable you to serve. And then also mentoring analysts, looking after their progression. With analytics engineering, again, I think on the individual contributor track is very different to the analyst one. I think as you go upwards as an analytics engineer, it's very much where your technical skills keep going up and up and up. And I think it's much more similar to becoming like a principal software engineer. You want to get better and better at your tool chain. You want to have mastery over obviously Git, SQL, DBT, warehouse optimization of queries, probably to a level of software engineering as well, just generically, because it's so useful to then go beyond your data stack and fix things upstream of yourself, because it unblocks you. Being able to do that is so powerful. One of the analytics engineers we've hired used to be a front-end developer, and that's something we really want to leverage.
That's so interesting. One of the things that I think is so hard to know the answer to yet, not that there are so many more analyst profiles who have been doing this work for 15, 20 years, but they exist. People have been doing that work for a long time. And the analytics engineer as a title is still pretty new, and the tooling is still pretty new. It is, I think, a pretty wide open question of what does an analytics engineer look like after having done that work for 15 years? And to the extent that we want that IC track to exist and to continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And it feels like you said, that the thread to keep pulling on is, how do I continue to make data products for users? And maybe that is on the ingestion side. Maybe it's front-end frameworks for downstream users to use. I don't know the answer to that, but that feels productive.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about enablement and what becoming a master at the tool that enables, that you use for enablement. And sure, if you're behind a company with a data product, that could be learning how to either present your data product as an API or as a front end or something else. That naturally involves more software engineering and becoming better at that side of it and going further than analytics engineering.
Is there a problem of burnout in the data industry? Do people, like new grads, come work crazy hours, round the clock, getting all these answers to questions from the team, and then feel like I've had enough and try different paths? Or is that not quite a problem in data? I'm thinking about it because you mentioned you were initially fresh out of college, went to one of the big 4 accounting firms. It's often viewed as like a 2-year program, and you go on to do something else. I myself was an investment banker for a couple of years. You do enough weeks, 80 plus hours, you get pretty tired. Is that similar in data at all, or does that not really exist?
I think it probably does exist. I don't think it's as commonplace, certainly as in investment banking. I think what you'll find with data is there will be some environments where, especially in younger startups, where if you're the only one and people are trying to work at the weekend and at all times of night, yes, you'll end up being pulled left, right, and center and having to meet their needs. I think in slightly larger companies and corporates, I don't see that being as big of a problem. I think, say at Lyst, when I did that migration at the start, I did work some pretty long hours and long weeks, but that was mostly because I was actually really enjoying learning something new, and the that I was actually enjoying that deadline of Black, because you can see a deadline coming, and once you get there, that's not the end of it, but it's the end of it being so high pressure. And I think there will be times like that in every analytics engineer or analyst's life, where they've got these intense periods that they have to deliver something for, and they can be enjoyable as long as they're managed well.
Yeah, it seems in data, especially if you start out in data early on in your career, you get a lot of great skill sets. You have SQL, which is very translatable to lots of different industries, can help you answer questions. You learn to have this curiosity and get business context. Is it, for those that don't go on to have the 20 plus years in data, what is a next launch pad for them? Or is there common trends for people who start in data and then go do X?
So actually, one of my analytics engineers has recently moved to being a technical product manager. And I feel like that can be quite natural, because it's that same understanding and scoping of how a system should work. And it's just moving more towards defining how it should work rather than going and building it. And I think that's true of software engineers as well. You can go and become those like technical product managers and business analysts. And I think that's fairly natural. For analysts, I think it's quite common and logical to become more business focused. So you could end up in growth and marketing. You could end up in product as a more general product manager, or in strategy, and finance as well, obviously is natural. So I've worked with people who were in data teams and then moved into finance, because it's such a strong, finance have to deal with so much data all the time. It's a very natural step. Certainly quite a few of the data teams I've worked with have been inside finance. So this is the first one that I've worked at that's been inside engineering.
I'm just curious, at Lyst, do you have embedded data analysts that in different parts of the organization, or is it all centralized within your org? Yeah,
so we have I guess a hub and spoke model. So we have a central team which has analytics engineers and analysts, but we also have an analytics engineer in finance, and an analyst in a product team, and an analyst in a growth team. And we can see that expanding. Probably we can see those analysts on the spokes expanding faster than the central team. I feel like analytics engineers in finance is a really natural thing. I think often when finance have analysts, they really want analytics engineers, because the stakeholders in finance are very data literate, very happy to chop up data themselves. They just need the data set provided for them that meets their needs.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to bring a skill set that you know in data, but also learn something new when you become embedded. We have that too. We have a fantastic product analytics engineer at DBT that I work super closely with, and he gets to straddle both worlds a little bit of product and also data. So we're going to wrap up. We ask this to all our guests, but looking 10 years out, what do you hope to be true for the data industry?
For analytics, we're getting to a point of having a fairly mature toolkit. I look after data science at Lyst as well, and I'm looking at what they have, and it's so much less mature. Like, you have some really cool things out there, like coiled and implementations of Dask like that out there, but they're still, very notebooky. They're not production ready, I'd say. And I'm seeing some new startups like Layer and things like this emerge, and the idea of like feature stores, and which are similar to metric stores in many ways, arise. And I hope that will be better, because I feel like data science is so valuable if it's deployed properly and applied properly. And we just spend a lot of time dealing with infrastructure and making a deployment with data science. And I think that could do with if data science came to the same level of maturity in the way that analytics has in the last 5 years, I think that would be amazing. Also, I think I feel like we still have to worry about, and this is true of analytics, you still have to worry about like sizing your infrastructure and things like that. And I think it's going to become unnecessary to do so in the near future. And I think that would be a really good step forward as well. I'm also really seeing an emergence of, whereas in the past BI tools were very closed source, you've got like Tableau, Power BI, Looker to an extent as well. And I'm seeing all parts of the stack becoming more open source, ETL as well. And I think that's an encouraging way forward The remaining piece that isn't open source is the data warehouse itself. And I can understand why that's a difficult thing to be open source, although there are people trying. There's things like DataFuse out there. But that would be interesting to see if there was a truly usable open source data warehouse in 10 years' time.
We just had a fun fundraising announcement by ClickHouse today at $2 billion. So I think the future of a open source cloud warehouse, is around the corner. But that sounds super exciting to me too. I'm interested in a lot of those trends.
David, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a ton of fun.
Thank you for having me.
Where can our audience learn more about you and what you're up to?
Feel free to reach out to me on DBT Slack. I'm regularly on there and pretty responsive. Then also Locally Optimistic, I'm on there, and LinkedIn. Those are probably the best places to reach out to me. GitHub, I'm slightly less responsive on, but yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys.
The Analytics Engineering Podcast is sponsored by DBT Labs and is hosted by Tristan Handy and myself, Julia Schottenstein. Have comments, questions, or guest suggestions? Email us at podcast@dbtlabs.com. Our producers are Jeff Fox and David Krevitt. If you enjoy the show, please drop a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening.